Look, I get it. Valour Reviews Volur. Ha 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 ha. The funny thing is I'm getting a little bit of payback right now because I actually am not 100% sure on how to pronounce this guy's name. I think it's Volur, maybe. Something like that. Tangent aside, welcome to today's episode. This video was sponsored by headphones.com. More about them in a second. All you need to know is that 64 Audio had nothing to do with this review, and all thoughts and opinions are always going to be my own. Today we're talking about this premium IEM is going to be worth it because it has a pretty hefty price tag and therefore a lot, and I mean a lot, of competition. So let's go ahead and talk about the Valour. This is a 10 driver design. This has 2 dynamic drivers for the bass response, 6 mid-range balanced armature drivers, 1 high mid balanced armature driver, and what they call a TIA high balanced armature driver for the top end. And that seems to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting in the top end. We'll talk more about that in a second. I don't know if I've ever talked about multiple drivers versus one singular driver. I'm not of the mindset that more drivers is necessarily better. I do think that if utilized properly, it's kind of a superior design. Like the best speakers in the world are never, ever just single driver designs. They are always multiple drivers to really get the full range experience. We don't really see that very often with headphones, especially not ones that are any good. But with IEMs, we do see that these multi-driver designs can really have their benefits. But I'm much more of the mindset of quality over quantity. Some of these massive driver counts like 10, 12, 16, I don't really think that the fact that it has that many drivers matters a whole lot. I would much rather see quality here over quantity, especially because from an engineering perspective, all those different drivers, that's just introducing more points of failure. So if you can achieve the same sound quality with less, if that's possible for the tuning of your IEM, I would personally prefer you do that. This also comes with a very clever acronym called APEX, which stands for air pressure exchange, and it's for the tuning filters that actually come out of the side of this IEM and can be replaced. Now, I think there's supposed to be 4, but I only got 3. I think this review unit was sent to another reviewer before it got to me. So I don't have the gold ones, but I do have the light gray, mid gray, and dark gray ones, which seem to be the ones that they're kind of promoting here on the box. So I think that's the ones I'm supposed to be using. These subtly affect the sound signature some more than others. They basically have that kind of air pressure modulation. So different ones allow different air pressure. This affects pretty much everything about the sound quality, but not substantially. A little bit more bass for some of them, a little bit less bass for some of them, slightly wider sound stage, slightly less sound stage, just depends on kind of which tips you swap for. I landed on the mid-gray ones. I felt like those had the best overall performance for me specifically. Now, I've seen a couple thumbnails about this talking about the bass response, and I was immediately very worried about this IEM because as soon as I popped it in, it was really underperforming. And I found out what I actually had to do was a little bit of a tip change. They have this cool wheel for tips. It's kind of neat, kind of just slots into this pretty generic carry case. And the tips that I would normally go for are just kind of your standard depth silicone tips that they have. Their tips don't seem to be particularly built any differently than anything you would get for a much cheaper IEM. But I actually found that the ones that sounded the best were ones that I normally wouldn't go for, which are going to be the shallow silicone tips that actually have the ear nozzle kind of coming flush with the end of the tip. Now that nozzle is actually pretty long, but it is fairly slim, and I found it to be really, really comfortable actually. If you're comparing against something like a Sony Z1R, I actually find these a lot more comfortable because of the nozzle circumference being a lot smaller than that headphone. But this tip change was so important. I can't express how important this was. This was going from another like basically terrible review to something that is actually fairly competent in its price range because of the right tips. So I'd highly suggest that you try a few different tips, even aftermarket ones if you get this, because the sound signature really varies a lot. Not that that's any different with IEMs, but I don't love a lot of the options that they give you, at least for my ears. Headphones.com is a premium hi-fi store with excellent prices, great customer service, and a great member rewards program that actually earns you points. They also offer bundle deals and open box deals, including right now they have a 109 Pro that if you're thinking about that headphone, which you should, I would personally pick up. So if you're thinking about buying some high-end headphones, that is where I would do it. Thanks again, Headphones.com, for sponsoring today's video. So I finally find the right tips. What am I hearing? The tips really added a lot of rumble, kind of that deep kind of sub-bass region rumble that you would get with really, really good bass. And it was finally coming forward a lot more than the relatively flatter delivery of the original tips that I was using on this. Now, even though the bass here is quite a bit and it's quite substantial and it makes a big impact on the overall sound quality, I do feel like that the bass quality was more important to 64 audio than the bass quantity. This is not the most quantity that you will get out of an IEM, but the quantity to quality match is quite good on here. So I'm pretty happy with the bass response. It doesn't have extremely unique characteristics like the Sony Z1R, like I talked about, where that headphone has a strange bass delivery where it's so broad and big that it actually sounds like it's coming from outside of the IEM's other range, where it kind of feels like really underlying bass that's almost coming from a subwoofer. This doesn't quite hit that level, but it maintains a very quick and very fast quality while maintaining a lot of punch and attitude to it, which I like a lot. I do wish it was a little bit more characteristic, a little bit unique, especially given the price tag, but it's certainly not poor performance. This is my first 64 audio IEM that I've actually reviewed, so I'm not quite sure what the sound signature they go for, but given this performance, it seems like they go for a relatively realistic sound quality for its bass response and not something super over exaggerated like with the Z1R. Okay, mid-range is probably the weakest component of this, and this is one of those things where I come back to those 6 mid-balanced armature drivers that they're using. I have to question why, because they don't really seem to be doing a whole lot for the sound signature. I don't know if they're filling up certain frequencies with these different ones, and they kind of have this kind of trying to kind of shape it through different balanced armatures, but the delivery here is just a little bit underwhelming. The forwardness is the real problem. Nothing grips you, nothing reaches out and grabs you and really commands your attention, and I was always waiting for it to do that. I wanted the voices to attack more and command more focus and develop their position and authority naturally, but again, never quite did that for me. If you like a more forward vocal delivery on your IEMs and you're still looking for something that's really in the high end, it does cost a lot more than this, but if you are in that market, the Empire Ears Odin, if you can deal with a little bit of mid-range shoutiness, it's got really solid mid-range properties otherwise, and it's probably my kind of go-to direction for a mid-range focus, ultra high-end IEM like this. Now, I do want to take a quick break to talk a little bit about music, because the right music can really make or break an IEM. It can make it sound incredible, or it can make it sound really bad. Now, 2 types of music that I actually found to be incredible with this was hard rock that has a lot of like hard-hitting drum riffs. Think System of a Down or Slipknot, those things that are slightly newer in the generation of rock, where rock recordings started getting a little bit more dynamic and alive sounding than the previous generation. I think that the added dynamics of the music really assist this IEM sounding more open and alive, and it plays it really, really well. I find it very, very enjoyable, especially because of how the treble is handled, which we'll get to in a second. The other type of music is acoustic and electronic bands like Daft Punk or Polyphia. Polyphia is, if you like the song Playing God from Polyphia, this is exactly what type of music I would personally listen to and really love on this IEM. It just has the right space between instruments, the right bass response, the right quality and sound behind it without getting too bright and too sharp. It just sounds really awesome. What music is not good with it is anything that has a real vocal presence that is driving the quality of the music, like if you're listening to Lana Del Rey or Adele, even some male singers. It's just, it doesn't quite have the push in there to really pull you and suck you into the music like an IEM of this price tag should. Now, treble response. A lot of IEMs in this price tag tend to go with a more forward treble response to come across as hyper detailed. And this doesn't really do that. This actually takes a slightly darker but still present approach where it sounds very naturalistic. Or it sounds very natural, kind of like you would normally hear with your hearing, but without being overly emphasized in the treble response to kind of feign detail a little bit. This has 2 benefits. 1, it's not bright, it's not really that sharp. And 2, on those busy rock recordings like your System of a Down, stuff like that, it's a lot less frantic in the top end. It doesn't sound quite as busy up there. You get a lot more room to breathe and kind of understand and comprehend the music without it being too kind of overwhelming. The downside to this is that it doesn't sound as detailed as some other IEMs. So I'm going to bring up in a second my Fur M5s, which are an equivalently priced IEM with a lot more treble. And it's not as detailed as those. Now, sound staging is something that the tips really adjusted. The imaging is always really good on these, but sound staging width, I think it's because of the slightly lax treble response. It doesn't quite hit super wide for me. This is not a super open sounding IEM. That is an area where I think they could improve a little bit. Now, upper treble comes back with a vengeance. Things above 15K, this really seems to kind of push forward a lot. So a perfect song from this is, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, is Geminosi from Kalila from the Hallucinogen album. The introduction of the high-end treble sounds that are kind of fluttering around your head at the beginning, they really pop out and grip you, and they do have a lot of treble. So because this is a multi-driver design and their high-end is using their TIA balanced armature, I think that's what's actually driving this, because it almost sounds like separate in a weird way, in a good way, but it almost sounds like it's a separate type of sound than the rest of the IEM. And I could just be completely making this up. It might just be a tuning thing here, but it really does seem to be quite high fidelity and really resolving in that region. But there's a little bit of a latency leading up to it where it does seem a little bit dark until you get to that region. And so a lot of like treble focused things like guitar, they don't really have that same gripping effect until they get really, really into the top end, which most stuff doesn't, especially with a lot of recordings nowadays. They don't tend to include a lot of ultra high end sounds for natural recordings. Now, these are the Fur M5s, an equivalently priced competitive headphone to this, also multi-drivers. The fidelity of the top end here is more clear. It is more resolving, but it's a lot more forward. And again, when you get into your tracks like Toxicity or Psychosocial or something, those top end sounds get a little bit more frantic and a lot busier on this IEM. And it's not quite as pleasing, honestly, as the 64 is for that. But if you're listening for more detail and resolution, I do think that the M5 is a little bit better. I do think that the tuning of the M5 is a little bit better for bass response, but it makes it a lot more of a V-shaped sound signature than that of the 64. The 64 is kind of a smoother sound signature until you get to that real top end stuff. Honestly, I think these are both really good, but for two different people. If you like V-shaped, the M5 is probably a little bit better. If you like smoother, more enjoyable, more laid back, the 64 is probably better. When it comes to the Z1R, it's kind of similar experience. The Z1R is a little bit more V-shaped than this IEM is. One of the more memorable things about the Z1R is the more crystalline experience with the treble response that this really doesn't quite have as much. And again, the bass response is a little bit stronger on those, hitting further down and kind of sounding more separate from the music and kind of giving you a more underlying bass performance than these do, with a little bit more dynamic slam to it too. Again, maybe not as balanced as this is. And so again, two different customers. All right, now my conclusion with this. I think like with most IEMs, like the Z1R, like the M5, like anything basically over $1,000, there is a little bit of a because high-end tax to it. Like you're paying more because it's high-end. Now, I don't think this is great, but it is what it is. I don't think that I would use this as my one and only IEM, but if you had the luxury to be able to have multiple high-end IEMs for different purposes or different genres, I can actually see this being for a specific type of genre. Specifically, I really enjoy this with rock, like I said, or things like Daft Punk, Polyphia, etc. It's got a pretty powerful bass range with the right tips and a kind of a pleasant, unoffensive tuning. And with the right music, it's going to be pretty nice. I don't know if I've heard this exact tuning in a cheaper IEM, though I have heard stuff that I personally like more that costs less. But a lot of these IEMs, they are going to appease a specific type of person. I don't think I'm the target market for it, but I could definitely see somebody else really, really enjoying this IEM. So if you get the chance to listen to this or you want to pick it up and try it, I would recommend that. And you can do that at headphones.com. Thank you again, headphones.com, for sponsoring today's video. You can check their website out down below for this, many other headphones, including that 109 Pro.